At Haverton Military Academy, a place built on polish, discipline, and prestige, a man named Raymond Holt swept the marble corridors every morning before the first light of dawn touched the flags outside. He was a silent fixture in the shadows, neither part of the rank and file, nor among the venerated alumni portraits that adorn the hallways. He wore a gray custodial uniform and an old faded baseball cap that had the word retired stitched above a patch that most cadets never bothered to look at. His shoulders stooped slightly, his gait slow but steady, and his face was a map of decades past, lined with quiet endurance. No one ever asked for his name. To most of the cadets, he was just the janitor, background noise in a building full of pride and performance. He moved unnoticed among young men and women who carried themselves with ambition bordering on arrogance, fresh from military bloodlines and suburbia, sharp in their uniforms and sharper with their tongues. At Haverton, tradition ran deep, but entitlement ran deeper. They strutted through the corridors like they were born to lead, their boots echoing confidence. They practiced their salutes in mirrors and rehearsed their speeches for imagined wars. And Raymond Holt? He cleaned up after them. He emptied their trash, mopped their messes, and wiped coffee spills from mahogany tables they gathered around while barking orders at one another. Some cadets mocked him, not all, but enough. They called him Captain Mop or Sergeant Sanitary. One joked loudly that Holt must have gotten lost on his way back to the Veterans Hospital. The others laughed. Raymond never said a word. He simply pushed his broom with slow precision, his silence taken as defeat, as shame. But it wasn't shame. It was memory. They didn't know what it meant to survive. They hadn't earned the right to understand. To them, leadership was a drill, a performance, a path lined with awards and ambition. To him, it had once been a matter of life and death. But those were things they'd never imagined because they had never stood in the dark with only silence and the weight of orders between them and a catastrophe. Then, a week before the Academy's most celebrated event, the annual leadership symposium, the ridicule reached a new low. It happened in the cafeteria. The clatter of trays and hum of early breakfast conversations filled the space when Landon Pierce, a second-year cadet known for his drawl and swagger, intentionally shoulder-bumped Raymond as he passed by with a tray. Eggs, toast, and a plastic cup of orange juice hit the floor with exaggerated drama. "Whoops," Landon bellowed, grinning to his friends. "Looks like we got a code yellow. Soldier." The sarcasm dripped off the word soldier like acid, and the whole table erupted in laughter. Raymond, silent as always, bent down and started cleaning. No glare, no rebuttal, not even a pause. Landon added to the moment by knocking over his chair, tossing a used napkin on the pile. Others followed. Someone dropped an empty cup. Another flicked a wrapper. Someone tossed a half-eaten banana onto the mess. And still Raymond cleaned, every movement slow, steady, and purposeful, as if he'd seen worse. Because he had. They didn't know that. To them, he was just the guy who cleaned the marble. Not the kind of man whose stories you'd find in secret military briefings or whose decisions had once determined whether or not entire units survived. No one saw the way he paused briefly outside the Hall of Honor every morning. No one noticed the way he always looked at a particular photographer, grainy black and white picture of a young officer standing in the middle of a dust storm, saluting through chaos. He always stared at that image just long enough to slow his breathing. Then he moved on. Days later, someone left a printed prank application on Raymond's janitor card. It was for a made-up position, senior custodial commander. Under skills, they'd written mop foo and advanced trash deployment. Raymond didn't react. He folded it neatly, tucked it into his back pocket, and resumed sweeping. The disrespect never got a rise out of him, which only encouraged more of it. Because they didn't understand. Because they hadn't seen the bodies of friends being lifted from dusty roads, or heard the sound of radio static right before an ambush, or delivered final words to grieving families. They hadn't been left behind by the very system they were training to serve. Raymond had. He remembered the names of men who never made it home. He remembered the taste of dirt and fear, the confusion of orders shouted through gunfire, the smell of sweat mixed with gunpowder. He remembered the moments where decisions had to be made in seconds and lives depended on it. And now, he remembered how it felt to be forgotten. But everything changed the morning of the symposium. Haverton's main hall was transformed. The rows were lined with cadets in their finest dress uniforms, brass-polished, boots shined to perfection. Flags hung crisply above the dais, and instructors paced with clipboards, whispering checks and instructions into radios. This was the moment everyone had waited for. The keynote speaker? General Thomas Granger, a four-star legend, a battlefield strategist, hero of multiple campaigns, and mentor to some of the highest-ranking officers of the past 20 years. His name alone commanded awe. His presence demanded silence. Outside, down a quiet corridor, Raymond Holt wheeled his janitor cart like every other day. He stopped at the edge of the hallway, his eyes drawn toward the ceremony hall. Inside, the double doors opened. General Granger stepped in, tall and stoic, his uniform adorned with ribbons and badges that told stories of courage and endurance. The room snapped to attention. Salutes struck the air in unified motion. But Granger didn't go to the podium. He walked past the front row, past the brass, past the photographers and their flashes. He walked with purpose down the aisle until he stopped right at the doorway. Everyone followed his gaze. There stood Raymond Holt, mop in hand, cart behind him, a confused expression shadowing his face. And then, in front of the entire room, General Granger raised his hand and gave him a full, formal military salute. Silence swallowed the room. Not a whisper, not a breath. "Sir," Granger said, his voice low but unmistakable. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Shock bloomed across the cadets' faces. Some gasped. Some stared. Granger didn't stop. He turned to the room. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to recognize a man who has shaped more lives than I ever will. A man whose strategies saved 214 soldiers, including myself, during Operation Sovereign Shield. A mission still classified until recently." He turned back to Raymond. "His name won't be found on your textbooks. His face isn't in your academy brochures. You call him the janitor. I called him Commander Raymond Holt." Chairs creaked as cadets shifted in stunned silence. Commander Holt was the backbone of tactical success for more than a decade of classified operations. His record was buried for security, his identity protected. But make no mistake, he is one of the most decorated, respected officers I've ever served under. All eyes turned to Raymond. His eyes didn't shine. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once. Granger stepped aside. "Would you address them, sir?" For the first time in years, Raymond Holt stepped forward. Not with pride, not for himself, but for those who never returned. He stood at the front of the room, his hands behind his back. The silence was heavier now. Not awkward, but reverent. "I won't speak for long," he began. "I don't need applause or recognition. I've buried friends without names on gravestones. I've walked through fields and deserts with ghosts following every step." His voice was calm. "You think leadership is about being heard. It's not. It's about listening, about carrying more than you ever thought possible and walking anyway, about standing still when it would be easier to run, about knowing when to fight and when to protect." He paused. "I stayed at this academy because I believed in it, even when it didn't believe in me. Not for glory, but for you, because one day you'll lead others, and how you treat the quiet ones, the forgotten ones that will define you." He stepped back. The room remained silent. Then, one cadet Landon Pierce stood up, his chest tight with emotion. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking, "I am sorry. I didn't know. That's no excuse." Raymond gave a slight nod. And then, one by one, every cadet in the room stood. No applause, just silent salutes. Every instructor joined. Every officer, even the academy's commandant. 200 salutes for a man they had once mocked. Raymond didn't stay for the ceremony. He turned and walked away, down the hallway, broom in hand, disappearing once more into the background. But now they saw him. Now they remembered, and they would never forget again.